the funny thing is that you write something, I probably spent 3.5, 4 years on this book, like part-time, just like slowly grinding it. It's like a degree. And it's like, the funny thing is, I remember I had one of my leaders at my church, our main leadership team. I sent a digital and audio copy to them, and he called me like 3 days later and he said, Jay, I read your book. It is so good. And I honestly, Nick, I almost started to cry, because you have no idea if it's good, because like I've read it, probably 20 times, edited it in my office in my garage, and I have no idea. So like when you say it better be good, I feel the same way. I'm like, it better be good, because if not, I've wasted so much time. And so, but that's part of putting your ideas out. You got to like work hard and you got to put it out. And I know there'll be things that people will push back on, but I'm really hoping it helps church leaders and ministry leaders think more holistically about digital. That's really my big hope.
Welcome to the Digital Ministry Podcast. I'm your host, Nick, and I'm with my good friend, return guest, fellow podcaster, and now author, Jay Kranda. Jay, thanks for being here again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Am I
Episode
the first repeat?
Yeah.
Am I?
Yeah, I think you are. You were episode 1 when
That's
Nils ghosted us.
That's right. That was the best cold open ever. That was I probably watched that 3 times just laughing.
I send it to Nils every day for a week, I'm sure. Smart. Jay, thanks for coming back on. I'm excited about our conversation today because you have birthed a labor of love in the form of a new book. Online Church is Not the Answer. I love that title, by the way.
Thanks.
That's great. Good work on that. It's a real, it's a hook. It's a head scratcher, which is probably the point, right?
Yeah. Well, what's funny is I went on a journey of writing this book and slowly writing it, because I really, my heart behind it was to help church leaders and ministry leaders think more holistically about digital and how you integrate it into your discipleship pathway, and kind of getting beyond just online church here in the US, and it's used internationally too, but there's platforms like the Church Online platform where you can stream worship services. And a lot of people, like when you think online pastor, you think, oh, you're over the weekend streaming thing and people that are sick or can't make it to church. And I really with this book want to challenge people to think beyond that and think more holistically. And it's funny, a book title, if anybody's written a book or gone through this process, you change it many times and you go on a journey. And actually I got this because I got fairly close with one of the larger Christian publishers, and I went through a couple of rounds with them, and they ended up pulling out the second round. And I was bummed. But one of the things I learned was they said that my title was kind of very limited at the time. And my title at the time was Thinking Digitally as a Pastor.
Okay.
And they said, are only pastors allowed to read this? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about it that way. And they really challenged me to wrestle through that, because I'm somebody who I read 30, 40 books a year, sure, physical, audio. And I'm like, yeah, the title is what it is, the marketing. It's what gets you in. And eventually this is something that, I kind of came to, and I am proud of it. I'm proud of Chris Tripudi, who created the cover, and he had some fun with it. But yeah, it just comes to that idea of, I think we're wired to be physical and spiritual beings, of course, and I do think though, physical ministry is a vital part of how we do church and how we do community. I use this illustration in the book of, my wife and I text and interact with each other digitally throughout the day, but we come home to each other for a reason. And I think that experience isn't going away. But at the same time, I don't think you can forsake and limit what you can do digitally. And I think churches sometimes think, oh, nothing. Oh, it's all physical or it's all digital. And I'm trying to make this argument that let's leverage digital for what it is and not forsake it, but also let's connect it to your strategy in person. And so this is where I kind of unpack it's kind of a manifesto of how to think about this as a church leader. And I hope it encourages ministries and churches.
Well, just the feedback that you mentioned, before we kick this off, of your buddy and colleague saying like, this is great. I think the initial feedback has been really good. So I'm happy for you. I'm proud
Thanks,
of you
man.
for that. And I also think about you as like the probably foremost leader, practitioner, thinker. There's some others that I could throw in there. I don't want to like do a bunch of name dropping, but you are definitely like at the top of online church, like pastors, to use your phrase that you said earlier. But I would really say like thinkers, thought leaders, practitioners, guides. Your voice has been so valuable, I think, in the church space, because you're actually doing the work. Like I had a buddy once who I was on a board with him, and we were talking about this church leader that just wanted to go on the road and like be a speaker. Like I'm making a transition. I'm going to go to writing books and speaking. And he's like, that's the beginning of the end, because like the only reason you have a platform in the first place is because of the work that you've done. And once you give that up, like it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, but eventually that road runs out because you're not doing anything anymore. But you're in it. So for those that I kind of took advantage of the fact that you've been on here before, I didn't give you a proper intro, but you're at Saddleback Church. You're the online campus pastor. But apart from titles, I want you to give our listeners a little bit of scope to this, because I think, and I'm going to lead you a little bit on this. Last time that we talked about like your day to day, I think you told me you're over 1,700 satellite groups that are within, like, outside of a certain radius from your main campuses. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Give us the scope of what your online pastor role looks like at Saddleback.
Yeah. So for sure, I've been the online community pastor at Saddleback full-time since 2013. I was doing it before that, even in the, 2010 and so forth. Sure. So I was one of the first online pastors to be hired. It's a small list of us. And I'm still to this day, the online community pastor. And I really enjoy that role.
I think you're probably one of the few that's been in it for that long, like
consecutively. Oh, yeah.
Because Nils started there too, but he's moved on to some other stuff.
All my, I kind of jokingly say all my friends during COVID became full-time consultants. And so in a good way, I think there is a role of that to help churches, but I'm kind of with you. Like, I don't know what my future entails. I'm not going to try to get ahead of myself, but I really I don't feel like what we do digitally at my church is figured out fully. And so I love the idea of being a practitioner and, wrestling through some of these things. Even the last 6 months has been really fun because, we've gone through a transition at my church from our founding pastor to a new pastor. And even that, like having a world famous best-selling author pastor, and then to go to a younger guy who's very gifted, but he's not our founding pastor. We had to wrestle through, how does that impact our streaming strategy and our remote engagement and all these things. And that's been a lot of fun. And that's not easy because you have to learn, like, okay, wow, we got hit. Our attendance got hit. How do we build back up?
Yeah.
And right now our church is in a process of wanting to expand campuses. And just a couple weeks ago, I was in Boise, Idaho, and we did a meetup where we promoted it online. I said, we're going to be at this coffee shop. We want to launch something in Boise, potentially. We had 12 people show up to this coffee shop in Boise, and we're talking to them about launching this. I'm in a couple weeks. Next weekend, I'm going to be in Denver. We're going to do the same thing. We want to launch it. And I love connecting online to our campus expansion strategy. I'm probably going in mid-October. I'm going to go to Davao, Philippines, because we want to launch something there. And it's connecting digital and our streaming all together with our expansion. And that's the stuff I talk a little bit. I have a whole chapter about house churches connected to online. And this is some of the stuff we're still, I lay out a framework in here, but I'm very honest. Like, some of this stuff is being wrestled through. Now, I think in 10 years, there'll be an automatic playbook that will just make sense, but we're still in those beginning stages. But yeah, so like just a scope, I oversee our online worship services from Facebook, YouTube, our apps, and so forth. And we create a custom worship service every week that's a little shorter than in person, where I host and my team kind of pastor that community. We have hundreds of small groups online and in person that are connected to our community, people that engage solely on Zoom, or people that live far away and they do church in their area. We have house churches.
How many people are involved in that?
A couple thousand people that are engaged in those groups.
That's crazy.
Various scales. And then we have house churches. That's something we really the last couple years coming out of COVID, we've really doubled down on, where right now we have about 30 of these, we call them extensions, where they can be, 15 people to, we have one in Davao, Philippines that's, 50 plus people, and it's potentially could be a campus of ours if we want to do this. But that's why I'm going there, because I have a leader there that we have a campus actually in Santa Rosa, which is South Manila, and they kind of support this, but I've worked with the leader there, and we're looking at, like, could we launch something? So the point is that we see people engaging in all sorts of ways online, but we actually try to move them into physical community over a period of time, where we host discipleship classes monthly on Zoom. We have online groups. We encourage people to start groups. We have a house church kind of program called Extensions, and we connect you to one of our nearby campuses, Extensions, maybe a partner church. And if you can't do that for some reason, we have online options. But our online options are kind of a slippery slope to in-person, over a period of time. And so, but I kind of intentionally, we try. Now, there are real reasons why people can't do physical, especially you and I know this from working with ministries, in the Middle East and so forth. Like, there are some limitations. And even in the US, people don't realize, like, if you're American, this, but the US is pretty big. And a lot of people live in places.
Yeah, come to Montana sometime.
Oh yeah, I can't even. Yeah, it was funny because when we were going to Boise, we were doing the research. They were talking about this idea that there were 2 million people in all of Idaho, but they had experienced, like, so much growth the last 3 years or something. It was like they had added 500,000.
Yeah.
And I was laughing because I think Orange County, our county that I live in, has 3 million people.
Right.
Yeah. And my brain can't, and I know same thing, like 1 million people or something, or I don't even know, but it's like, people don't understand just how vast everything is. And so people live in rural, remote areas. Yeah. And I think that's going to be a big dilemma and opportunity for churches in the future, is that people, especially here in the US, people are moving to some of these areas because of population and housing. And you're going to have, I speculate in the book at the end, I have this future chapter. I think you're going to have the first church with 1 million locations in the coming decades, because you're going to have these ministries that are going to intentionally launch out of a home and try to scale, because, housing, and even as the political landscape changes with some of the more favorable laws in the US probably could change in the next, 50 years, you're going to have different strategies. People aren't going to necessarily be able to buy a big church and build a big building, but they could.
Yeah, tax deferment, and all that.
Like, think about this. Like, the largest multi-site churches in the world have, I think Life Church has 44 or 45 locations.
Wow.
And
by location, you mean a physical, like, church supported building?
Yeah, like a physical building, and they do all this stuff. 45. Like, that's one of the largest, if not the largest.
Yeah, right.
Like, I think we're going to have churches with hundreds in the future, and it will just be automatic. Like, you could start a church in your home, stream, have a discipleship pathway to start something in your area, do a house church network. I mean, some of this has already been done in China and Iran and some of these places, but I think we're going to see that strategy more intentionally done. Again, using online connected to in person. I think some of this stuff will be automatic. If not, it's already being done on some level, but I think it will just become a denominational standard.
Right.
We don't need a building. We don't need to invest. Like, there's so much money invested in buildings and leases and all this stuff. Like, why couldn't you just do it with $10,000 with a nice, phone and gear, and just do it, and maybe spend more of the money on outreach ads? I don't know. I mean, this is where we can get into fun territory, but yeah, well, I'm excited.
I was kind of fascinated by your statement that, like, you've been doing this 11 years now, titled. You've been doing it longer than that. And for one of the guys who's done, like, online pastoring more than maybe anybody else in the world, I might say probably,
maybe,
to hear you say that we're, like, at the beginning, 10 years is an eternity with, like, digital things and social media things. But what you just described, like this 1 million site church, and maybe the definition of a site changes a little bit, but, like, some of those things really have me thinking about, oh yeah, like, we are still really early. But what's at the core of all of this is something that you and I've talked about for years. It's like, how do you move people from online to offline? Mm-hmm. Not because online's bad necessarily, but it's like, we were built for in-person community, and there's a lot that happens in that community in a Christianity context that can't be replicated. So, I like your description of a slippery slope to in-person. But I would even imagine like in the Mountain West in the US where it is so spread out, you probably have people driving like long distances to meet with people, don't you? Do you ever see that?
Yeah, it's funny because we do sometimes we do them both digitally and in person, where we call them meetups.
Right.
And we've done it where like we'll email everybody and promote an event, like everybody in Singapore jump on the Zoom. And then actually one of our extensions, our house churches, we call them, started that way, where I emailed everybody in Singapore in our database and promoted it. And we had 25 people show up to the Zoom or something. And then we started a house church off of that. Like I said, hey guys, why don't you guys gather and meet? And now they meet every week with, 20, 30 people. And it's really cool because it started from this Zoom thing to this in person. But the same thing is like, we'll say, hey, I'm going to be in Dallas, or I'll be in San Francisco or whatever. And people drive from all over for that connection. And again, people do that because they want to, I think we're wired for that physical connection. And so again, it's not to say the digital connection isn't real. You and I primarily have a digital friendship. You know what I mean? We text and, do stuff like this. But, when you're in Southern California, we go to the Irvine Spectrum together and hang out. And it's like, I
was going to tell you, I'm going to be in LA this weekend, by the way.
So are you?
Yeah. So
sweet. So
if you're
so
free.
Like, yeah, well, and so like, I mean, this is the thing is that I think you need to think as a shepherd, how do we drive our ultimate objective? And I think in our case, depending on your org and how you think about these things, you're going to have different things. But for us, our objective as a church is we want to start more campuses that can bring people to Jesus and lead them. And so online is a funnel to fuel that. And so the question is, how do you do that? And so one of the number one things we have to strategically introduce friction to drive in person. So it doesn't mean you hurt online, but it means you turn off and on things in order to drive that. And so for example, why do I go to Boise in person and not just do it online? Well, because we want to launch a campus there potentially. And so we are experimenting with this idea. I can't tell you it's actually going to work because we haven't launched anything like in Boise yet, but like we go there to meet people and say, we're serious about this. And one thing we are doing now is we're starting an extension in Boise because one of the guys who showed up said, I'll host this in my home. And so, but this is where you have to figure out. So there's some things we do online, and there's some things we don't. Like, for example, like one of the things we don't do online is we don't do online baptisms. And again, I have friends doing online baptism stuff, but for us, coming from more of our Baptist roots, we believe baptism should be in person. And so what we will do is that we will encourage you to visit a campus and extension to get baptized, or we will train somebody in your community. But if you want me to do a virtual baptism, we say no. Right. In our own convictions of what scripture teaches, and again, everyone's going to be a variance on this, because it's not a salvation thing, we're willing to say no to some things.
Right.
And so, but we do that because we want you to show up. The same way as if you take membership online, you commit to starting a physical group. We don't want you to be a remote member by yourself. We want you to have other people. And the commitment is, I will work towards starting a physical group. So if you have a couple other people, we go, oh, that's Ecclesia, Koinonia, there's something there that we go, okay, there's something there. And we want you to work towards maybe an extension. But I think the hard part is digital opens up all these opportunities. And I just think generally church leaders sometimes are a little too quick to say no. And I would just go, hey, what if digital could come alongside and aid in your objective? And I think that's the question that I kind of walk through.
So I'm going to kind of drill down to motive a little bit, because some pastors and churches I've spoken with are like, the only purpose of online is to get people to show up on Sunday in person in my church. Just yes or no, real quick. Like, would you agree with that?
The only thing I would add is churches, especially here in the US.
I just realized it sounds like a gotcha journalism question, but
like, no. I generally say this thing because it's true too in the software that's been developed in the US as well, is that we're really good at streaming church and we're really good at collecting tithes. And everything, it's like everything else is kind of like meh. And so like when a church says like, oh, I don't really think about digital, and I'm like, I bet you're streaming something and I bet you're collecting tithes, but it's all the other stuff. I go, can we do more? But yeah, I generally I agree with that statement. Like that's probably 8 out of 10 churches kind of think that way.
Yeah. Well, it calls into question motive, you know? And so like, just help me, because I've been like, I'm kind of a skeptical person anyway, Jay. I think, you know,
Yeah.
we've spent enough time together. I can get a little salty sometimes, but like, if there's value for digital and online church beyond just driving people into the in-person experience, and the in-person experience is also incredibly important at some point, just help me or anybody that's listening to this conversation, like how do we properly kind of hold those two ideas at the same time? Like how do we both look forward to the opportunities that you see with online church and digital services? Like you're telling us there's a ton of green space. Well, why even, is it a focused funnel, or is there like something else there that like we're missing out on that can bring maybe like a more full experience or help the church grow forward?
So two kind of examples that I like to kind of lean into is, one is just generally relationships. So again, that marriage relationship, that I think the reason why, again, I come home to my wife every night and we do life in a proximity basis, because there's something about physical, but it also, I don't want to belittle, like when we're digitally interacting throughout our day. She texted me this morning. I went to Starbucks to get something, and she was making jokes because it looked like I was actually going to Taco Bell. And she was like, "Did you go to Taco Bell for breakfast?" And I was like, "No, I did not." But we're able to strengthen and stay connected digitally. And so when I look at my relationships, the way we use digital is a sign, why can't the church use it that way? And I don't think it's competitive and it cannibalizes each other. Now,
yeah, there you go.
To be fair, digital in a relationship can be distracting. So right. I think it's okay to have the alarm bell. So I think first I would tell any church leader, look at how you use digital. Like I talk about this in my book. One of my brothers lives in a like very rural Missouri, and then my other brother lives near me, but we haven't lived under the same house since we were 16 years old.
Right.
And it's a big pain point in our relationship because of just family trauma and all these different things. One of my best, I would say, connections is our text thread that I have with my brothers. We get to text each other constantly. And it honestly makes me emotional to think that if I lived in a different era, our relationship would have been limited to letters.
Right.
And my brothers and I text, and even this is an exaggeration of the type, but guys typically aren't great on the phone with each other, but we could be way more loose on a text thread.
Yeah.
And my brothers and I talk about things, and we share things, and we vent things, and it's only because of that digital connection. So when people say digital isn't possible, I would just go, look at your own relationships. Think about all the things you do digitally, text, phone, Zoom, email, like it can be meaningful. So I first look at that and I go, that's a model to go, how does the interaction with the way you disciple people and do ministry locally, look at your own relationships. And I think most of us, if not all of us, have digital connections that are strong, but it doesn't compete with the in-person. The other thing is I look at the relationship that we have with God and I go, the irony that so many church leaders want to say digital isn't possible because proximity is the best. And our primary relationship with God is not proximity based. God is not sitting physically next to us. Our relationship with the Holy Spirit is a non-spatial relationship. Now, I kind of jokingly tell people, if you want to argue that somehow Jesus is in some kind of fourth dimension, I don't know what to tell you. But I think the irony is, and I actually got this point from, I was on a panel during COVID with the theologian, Dr. Darrell Bach. And I was one of many. It wasn't me and him. It was like a
sparring.
Yeah, it was many. And I was just like, I remember like on the deal, I actually tell the story in my book, but I was like, I can't believe Dr. Darrell Bach is on this deal. And I was trying to grab my commentary that I have as his. And I was like trying to take a photo of him and send it to my brother. But he made this point that every time you limit what God can do online, you're limiting the omnipresence of God. And I think it's such a powerful point. And again, I think this is why I would go, they work together. And so like one of the and we can kind of get into any area of this. One of the things that I just say is I have this illustration in my book of you have a graph and you have kind of, I call it the alpha omega strategy. And the idea is that in one corner you have alpha, and the other corner, upper right-hand corner, you have omega. And what I say is have quadrants, and think of the 4 key areas of your ministry. It could be a church, a ministry. So you might, like for a church, traditionally it'd be like weekend services, group strategy, kids ministry. And what I would say is draw, without lifting your pen, try to say, how healthy is digital integrated into that area of ministry? And down in one axis, it would be 0 to 100% healthy digital integration. And if you draw this without lifting your pen, my encouragement on that visual is you'll start to see key areas beyond the weekend that have no digital integration. And so, like, for example, a lot of churches have streaming and giving figured out. But when you get into groups or kids ministry, they have never thought about it. And my key with that exercise is to kind of like, there's tons of ground to be made into the actual discipleship part of your strategy, and think beyond just the weekend. So like kids ministry. And the reminder here is like, the goal of healthy digital integration is not to replace the kids programming at your church.
Right.
The goal is to aid the objective. And so I use this example of, what if a church's digital strategy with kids ministry is a texting strategy? You just text the parents on Sunday afternoon, your kid learned about this story, and here are 2 talking points on how to engage your kid to reinforce the learning.
I love that idea.
That's a simple, like, again, texting isn't this like new technology.
Right.
It's dated. Again, digital integration is not using the current trends. It's just a simple strategy. And so you could get to 90% healthy digital integration by just introducing a texting strategy with your kids. And so this is where I kind of unpack this idea is think beyond the weekend, have simple digital integration, and 100% digital integration. It does not mean replace the physical. And again, what's hard about this is that can mean all sorts of things for different ministries and programs. And I try to lay it out as not a copy and paste strategy, but I try to kind of open the critical thinking so that you can start critically solving based off of your audience, your situation.
Well, I love that example too, just to tease it out a little bit. Like a lot of the current digital conversations that I'm hearing are like, how can we use AI? How can we use this new tool? And it's all the new stuff. I mean, to your point, digital should aid the objective, and texting some discussion questions on a Sunday afternoon, and timing is brilliant on that. You know, it all fits so perfectly together. Now, could you have AI write it and send it out?
Yep.
Fine, sure. Yeah.
You can do all sorts of things. Yeah, it was funny. I was using,
but it doesn't have to be brand new. It's like, let's just integrate these things.
Yeah. And that what's hard, and to the point on the AI thing, is that there's so many tools and platforms and things that we have to be thinking about. And so I think this is why I try to, I kind of jokingly say this, that I try to cut through all the hype, and I try to keep you focused on your objective. And it's like, there's so many tools. There's so many things. I'm constantly being told by somebody, our mutual friend, who's, Neil Smith, he just did a video I saw last night on some AI tool for real-time translation. And I hadn't heard of the tool. And so as a pastor, as a church leader, as a ministry leader, your goal isn't to be trendy. Your goal is to be productive on what you're trying to do. And so like, I try to say, like, you don't need to be on VR chat. You don't need to use Gemini every day. You just need to try to get done what you need to get done. And the idea is that when you hear about a new tool or a new platform, you ask the question, is it relevant to what I'm trying to do?
Yeah.
And so, and that's hard, because the average pastor, the average church leader, ministry leader, they're grinding. They're looking down, they're just trying. And I think digital is so confusing because it's constantly changing, evolving. And I try to provide some principles that can kind of keep you grounded and not get distracted by whatever's relevant at this second.
Yeah, that's really good. Let's talk about, you mentioned there's a future chapter. Can we tease that a little bit? Like, I want to know some of what you're thinking about for the future.
Yeah, I think I kind of unpack a couple different ideas, but and I try to not get too like, this is what's going to happen, you know what I mean? But I think in the coming decades, there's going to be a lot more digital only movements where churches will lean into digital in a way that will be very scary and challenging to many ministries. And I think it will result in a lot of digital only stuff. And I think it will result in a lot of minimalistic, no technology strategies for churches. Like you're going to have movements.
I think you kind of already see that a little bit.
Oh yeah. It's already there. It's a very small version of it, but you had, which is not surprising, but you have guys like John Mark Comer, coming out of Bridgetown. They canceled live streaming of their services. And I did a post about this, but I think it actually makes sense for what they're trying to do. They're going after a certain audience. Doesn't mean they're not doing digital in any way. It just means their healthy digital integration is not having a live stream. And I think that is a beginning of so much more. You're going to have people that, you're going to have people not doing apps or not wanting to use YouVersion on your phone. Just bring your physical Bible. And I think you're going to have these different, strategies. And again, not too different than how denominational fractions happen. I think there's going to be a lot of digital fractions over the coming decades. And I think there are cases for all of it to be good. I don't think there are pros and cons to it. I obviously lean towards leveraging digital more because I think you can wield it wisely, but I also understand why somebody might go, no, it's don't do it. And so it's going to be interesting to watch how people respond. But yeah, the same reason why, I think I'm not shocked when somebody thinks me as an online pastor. It's like, what in the world is that? You know what I mean? I would just go, it's going to be interesting to watch how it's evolved. But I think you're going to have, again, the extremes will be more extreme is kind of where we're going, which is, again, not a radical thought because that's how everything is, how the internet has evolved, every thought process and thing.
Yeah. Well, what about, I hesitate to even use the word, but I was going to say like Web3 or some of this like interactivity. The web has gone from like a one-way conversation, which is kind of what I would put digital or like streaming your church service in. It's mostly a one-way conversation. I know we've got like sidebars with chats and things like that, especially if you're on YouTube, there's comments and chat that's happening. But by and large, like that streaming idea is a one-way conversation. You've mentioned online groups a couple of times and like facilitating community. What do you think the future of like community facilitation looks like? And what are the kind of risks and concerns with that?
Yeah. And I, generally I think, obviously this is like, the Web3 stuff and, layer in all the crypto stuff. I think for sure, there's a lot smarter people than me that talk about like the future of the real use of cryptography is not, these payment systems, they're going to play a role, but it's actually about the security protocol that we won't have passwords. We'll have keys that are linked to our identity and, there's security, and to have more things built upon that so that transactions online can be more seamless. I think that's going to be a huge case where we're all going to have these, wallets and these identities where we can log into things seamlessly and we can control that. And I think that could be really important in the coming decades, depending on how favorability around laws around being a Christian can play out and evolve in the coming, I don't think it's going to be the next 10 years, but maybe the next hundreds of years. I think these are things we're going to have to wrestle through the same way as some of these regions. Like if you look at some of the missionary work in China and even like say more extreme Japan hundreds of years ago, there's reasons why we need to be secure. And I think this is Web3 is going to play a big part in some of this stuff. And so I get really excited personally about, and I know these are hype words and trigger words, but the use of AI in scaling conversations with people in discipleship. And so like I get really excited about, there'll be a time where you might be able to have an AI that knows your church's ministry's discipleship pathway, and they could use your resources, your tone, your person. And the same way as you could create an AI celebrity, you could create an AI of your ministry. And then the idea is that you could create a discipleship pathway conversation where instead of the pastor having to sit down with every single person and scaling that limitation. I mean, again, this is why the average church only grows to 60 plus people, because that's how many people a person can kind of manage. But what if I could have an AI bot? And this is where I would challenge you. Somebody might go, that's a scary thing. I don't want to think about that. I go, what if I could actually sit down and have coffee and talk with C.S. Lewis? Like that would be amazing. And I wouldn't worry about it being him real or not real. This would be fun. Or the same, I was listening to a pod. was watching a pod last night in bed of NT Wright. And I was like, I would love to get tea with NT Wright.
Yeah.
And you know what? If it was an AI bot, I wouldn't care. I would prefer the real NT Wright, but I think the AI type of integration and scalability, you're going to have these discipleship mentorship programs that I think are going to be really good. And I think it's going to challenge us. It's going to ask us, it's going to bring about new problems and things we have to wrestle through. But I think it's going to bring scalability in a way that we won't even begin to understand. And I think it's going to be a good thing. Now, on the flip side, you're going to have ministries, and I say ministries, but you're going to have ministries, cults, and people use it in the negative. So it's going to be a service that everybody will have access to.
Sure.
And so we're going to have to wrestle through that. But I think it's going to be really cool because I remember discovering, over 15 years ago or beyond, I remember when gotquestions.org, I discovered that tool. And I was like, this is really cool. The fact that there's just this website with answers. And again, you might go, there's answers on there that I don't fully agree with.
Sure.
But what if your church could have that and it's just scalable and it's conversational and it's not, I think that's going to be I think AI is going to scale discipleship. We're going to have to wield it wisely, but I get really excited about that.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like being discipled by, I think is what you said, by C.S. Lewis. Or having a conversation with him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you've got like this body of work that you could draw from, and so that is a fascinating idea. I think.
Yeah, like you think about your greatest mentors, the people that have mentored you.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that have mentored me that are pastors physically that I've spent time with and know with, so forth. And then I have people from all times that have, again, the Bible. Paul is mentoring me from a distant time. Yeah. You can call it a digital connection potentially. It's crazy to think like when we say what digital discipleship's not possible or it's limiting, I go, what the heck is the Bible? I know there's a spiritual component there that's deeper that I believe in.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to equate it to all these things, but it's like remote discipleship's been happening for a long time. I mean, that's what the Romans roads were. That's why Paul wrote those letters.
That's
and
what
so
the book of Romans was.
I know it's, and so like, it's crazy to think like there's some really cool things. I mean, that's why I read books. That's why I listen to books. Like there's a thought that I hear and I'm like, it rattles around in my head. And that person doesn't need to be physically present. Doesn't even need to be alive to influence me. And so it's crazy to think what AI and this could do as it kind of gets better and more accessible.
Well, I want to encourage people to read your book and be influenced by Jay Kranda and all of your experience. How do people buy it? I know I saw it on your website. You can download, I think, a PDF version there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's up on Amazon. You can buy the print there. I also have it on Audible. You can listen to my voice.
Did you voice it?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like?
Oh, it was fun. I just got a message from somebody that they said I read pretty fast, so they couldn't 2 times speed it because I already read it fast.
Good.
And so it's on Apple Books too. You can buy the ebook and the Audible there. And then, but on my website, I sell the PDF MP3. I have like bundles. So if you want to buy it and go through it as a whole team, it's a little bit more affordable there instead of buying all but it's only physical book is available on Amazon. So,
okay. And the sultry sounds of Jay's voice on Audible.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Give me feedback on how I sound because that's a whole nother thing talking about creating your own Audible. It's quite a process.
Yeah.
So.
I bet you've learned a lot. Well, I'm excited. I read your blog all the time. I don't know if you ever look at the stats and see, Bozeman popping up on there, but
yeah,
I've just loved, knowing you over the last 10 years, working with you on some of these things, some of them really challenging, like trying to figure this stuff out, trying to help people think through it. The frameworks that you've put together and trained so many teams with through MII have been incredibly valuable. I think that anybody who wants more of that, I love that it's not a prescription. It's like a methodology that you're talking about in the book. I would encourage people to get it and check that out and think about how do we use digital to aid the objective. I love that, Jay. So great job. Congratulations. Thanks, and thanks for spending some time with me today. I think we'll call it there and I'll let you get on with your day, but always good to have you.
Thanks, Nick, as always. Thanks.